I find rigging to be an essential step for building properly deforming mesh. It can be amazing at approximating the placement of edge loops, but after rigging and weighing the character, I'm sure that even the most experienced artist would still slightly alter their edge loops and volumes for even better deformations. I would tend to assume that in most big studios, if you're working as a character modeler, then you probably have another person working as a full-time rigger. Time becomes of the essence because you don't want to waste too much time performing other person's work. In this project, I rigged the character in an extremely simple way, using boxes as bones, thus utilizing forward kinematic techniques for animation. The liberating aspect of rigging is realizing that the perfect placement of pivot points is king. Then comes the understanding of principles of weighing the edge loop. The more complex you get, the more difficult it becomes, especially the face rigs. For the sake of modeling, keep it simple and straightforward. Don't be discouraged by rigging. Remember that all it is transformation, deformation of an object from point A to point B in 3D space. I went a little overboard in terms of weighing detail, because ultimately I did end up using the simple rig for my animations. So everything needs to be proper, but if you know that you're going to be passing the work off to a rigger, you might want to invest less time into this step. Honestly, even now, looking at the character, I could still pinpoint flaws in the design and the way I chose to rig and weigh him. But without this step, the character's deformations would have been much worse. Every character's shape is different, so things that you can't even foresee tend to pop up. And simple rigging proves to minimize the unforeseen problems. Now I'm gonna go over visually and show you what I mean. For the purposes of demonstrating the rig, I'll just kind of go over and play around, I guess, with the things that I already have. You guys can check out the solutions, the thoughts. For instance, you're gonna see the same thing over and over again for limbs, using that kind of cross form deformation technique. For the kind of this armor piece, I broke it down to generally 3 parts: the top, kind of the middle, and the bottom. They're just accessories, secondary animation motions. The hard part about these guys were this kind of part of it, connecting them and weighing them together, because if you go way too harsh on them, then they'll start breaking. So it's a lot of finesse and tweaks when you're actually animating them. I have the rotator cuff, and then right here I also have the shoulder rotate, and it's hard to see, but even in the shoulder I incorporated the whole cross form kind of idea. You know what I mean? Right here, his hand can bend this way, but I also have the additional control of moving the rotator cuff back or forward, kind of this kyphotic posture and straighter posture. With the armor, I chose to add a bone which has weight to 1 bone, so now I can actually remove that for the convenience. I also created the collarbone, and then I separated it out into 2 parts, the back and the front. These guys also added a little bit of detail to them. Move them around a little. Also, just like the armor pieces, used for secondaries in animation. These guys are the spine, top, middle, and bottom. This one is the pelvis. So from if I just select those three guys, now he'll be able to kind of lean forward and lean back. These purple colors represent the neck. Kind of the front part of the head. Even added a little bit of lip movement so he can scowl or have additional emotes in it as well. The helmet divided into three parts. The helmet moves. Moves slightly whenever he's walking or doing any type of motion, really. Also, straw movement. That actually helps out a bit, just to sell the secondary motions as well. Tail, the fin. It's pretty simple, really. It's just finding the proper placement of those pivot points could be definitely tricky at times. In terms of weighing, also pretty standard. Again, just experimental. But I want to show you what I mean by... So if you ever choose to use this method of cutting the joints, where here you have your patella, and then you have basically three segments here, right? The top, middle, and the bottom. And then when you have your... So we'll have this bone, for instance, and then we'll have the bottom bone of the leg. And then as you can see right here, this middle segment is weighted 50% to the bottom bone and 50% to the top bone. I think this one, I called this one a hip bone, this one the knee. And here we have no segment at all at the back, and that's what makes it work. 100% to the bottom, and then the top segment 100% to the hip bone. So every time, whenever you move the knee, 50% goes this way, 50% stays, but 100% always moves in the back. Same principle with the phalanges, with the fingers, right? It's nice because it keeps kind of the form of your knuckles or of your patella intact. All these guys just pretty much just secondaries. The arrow bag. You know, for the tongue, I think I added a couple of bones as well. You know, not even rotation. You don't only have to operate with rotation. You can also start moving the parts, and it depends on how you created your texture. If it's all one solid color, then you know you won't see any stretching or anything. So if you want to convey him eating a fly or something along those lines, then this can definitely work. Same thing with weighing. The weights are very much free form. The general consensus is anytime you put your bone then that area should have the most weight associated to it, and then gradually it will diffuse or diminish as it goes along. Strangely enough, the tail was a little tricky, and if I would probably change it if I had time, make it a little bit better. I call these, like this element is bleeding out to this part of the face, and that's very much per model dependent, because if you don't do that, if let's say this point was 100% weighed to the head area, then whenever you start moving, you'll start seeing nasty stretching and penetration. So same thing with here. There's always, it's very custom per case scenarios. One controller in the bottom, just because Unreal Engine 4 only supports one, but it's always nice to have three. One for translation, for movements, for scale, and for rotation. But I mean, you can always get away with just having one controller and having all those three parameters on one controller. These guys also just pretty much just the secondaries. Yeah, so I mean, very simple, straight to the point, but certain elements and certain designs can be tricky to get them working the best you can. Alright, let's move on then.